Welcome back. Now, during the decade that Hill Street Blues and Miami Vice dominated our TV screens, policing Sydney streets was a far cry from those Hollywood detectives in stylish get-up and sexy sports cars.
But now a dad and son duo are sharing the stories behind the real-life underbelly of police work in the 1980s. Ex-cop John Verhoeven and his son Paul, who is channeling Miami Vice for us this morning, are joining us. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about this project, Paul. It's your brainchild, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I grew up with a cop dad, which was super intense. I remember I wandered into his walk-in closet, which was full of case files, and stumbled across a few photos which legitimately led to some child therapy, because that stuff's pretty intense.
Yeah.
And, you know, in the schoolyard where you're bragging about what your dad does for a living, nobody believed me. Like, I could not get any of these stories across the line. So decades later, when I started having recurring nightmares because of these photos I was seeing, I sat Dad down and said, can we do like a Princess Bride-style true crime adventure story about it? And you kind of quietly said yes.
And I actually thought that there wasn't enough material, which is weird because we did the book and then we did the first season, 15 episodes of the podcast, and now we're into our second season where we delve deep into forensics. And it's weird. You think, oh, you know, what on earth could we talk about? But it's unpackaged itself over the years, and we've ended up with a trove of incredible stories.
Was there any doubt in your mind, John, that Paul wasn't going to be a cop?
Well, look, I'm
not judging the way he looks now. I'm just saying, growing up.
Look, from about the age of perhaps just after conception, I thought that perhaps it would be inappropriate for Paul to pursue, you know. Yeah, so I'm happy that he didn't, knowing what I know.
What you've seen and what you've been up
and
with.
also Paul's mother, funnily enough, my wife, was in the police force as well. That's where we met, and I actually proposed to her after 2 weeks.
Yeah, a bit quick, I think. I mean, it worked out well for me, obviously, because I'm here.
But your mother's been regretting that decision ever since. Is that what you're getting at?
No, not so much, although 2 weeks is pretty fast. I mean, Dad's a lot like me, and one of the things I've learned from doing the podcast and the book is that we are effectively the same person, except one of us is wired for action and one of us is wired to sit back and hide from the action.
But that sort of thing, though, we look at those TV shows we put out there as sort of like, oh, that's what it's like to be a cop. But being a cop in the 80s, I mean, how much was manhandling and there was no DNA back then?
There were no rules.
There was no rule.
Nothing. It was frontier land. It was staggering. It was so exciting. The adrenaline was coursing through my veins. I couldn't wait to get to work because you just didn't know what was going to happen on that shift. And it was sort of, we made the rules up as we went along. Obviously we had rules, but they were never adhered to, which I found challenging and exciting. But you'd go out for a shift and it was very proactive in that you'd generate your own work. If you didn't have jobs coming in, you'd go out and you'd hunt things down because it was all out there. And funnily enough, when I started very, very close to the studio in North Sydney, and it was full on.
And these were your bedtime stories at night, Paul, weren't they? Because you guys didn't have television, and you know your dad. He was the entertainment.
Yeah, Dad is very entertaining. That's a very good way of putting it. But yeah, he just got rid of the TV one day. And so we started just kind of diving into our imaginations for stories, and the places I went to were, you know, pretty dark, I think it's fair to say. And yeah, I would have made a terrible cop. Because I'm just like a warm, soft yogurt of a person. You
know, I'm hearing you joke about a lot of this sort of stuff, but I really feel like there's some truth behind your humour with that. I mean, were you deeply affected by some of the things you saw your dad do?
Oh, yeah, it was very traumatic.
Yeah.
And, you know, I do joke about it, but I did actually have to go to I went to a child psychologist about it, at which point they diagnosed me with ADD. I wonder where I got that from.
His mother. It's obvious.
Yeah. But, I mean, yeah, it really did get to me. And I think part of the great thing about Loose Units as a book and a podcast is it's been a way for the both of us to sit there and sort of sift through all this traumatic material and kind of process it. And especially for you, because I think emergency services workers, I mean, they see some stuff and they never talk about it. They just make jokes. Like, it's gallows humour.
Yeah.
And for me, how much I was traumatised by it is nothing compared to what you've been through.
Well, I after the police force, because I felt I'd had enough of that trauma, I then joined the Work Cover Authority where I investigated industrial accidents, if you can imagine what that was like. And then I went on to become a professional firefighter for 10 years, so I've effectively had about 20 years exposed to that. And as I always like to sort of say to myself and others, that probably the only thing in the world that is worse than what I've done is to go to war.
Tell you what, though, you can read it in the book, Loose Units, or get it at the podcast soon. You guys also do live events. It's great to have you both in. It's a really fascinating dynamic watching both of you sit here and talk.
Thank you.
There's a dynamic between you two. That's why this works. That's why the podcast is fantastic.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.